You posted on Instagram and TikTok about the great leaf debate. A lot of folks say, leave those leaves be. That's not necessarily the best thing to do, is it?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance in the topic of leave the leaves. And I'm sure if you're watching this, you have heard that phrase before because it's a really big hot topic in the sustainability space. I want you to leave the leaves in the sense that I want you to provide critical habitat for pollinators, and I don't want you to throw a bunch of carbon-based organic matter into a plastic bag and throw it in the landfill. Like, that would be bad, but you have to do it strategically. I had just made a video yesterday that's actually performing really well about how you need to apply nuance to the situation. There are a couple places where you should definitely rake up your leaves. Regardless of where you live, ubiquitously, sidewalks and driveways and places that are going to be literally a safety hazard, we're not leaving those leaves, right? And depending on how many trees you have, you might have truly inches and inches of leaves. And if you have an oak tree, those leaves aren't breaking down even in a humid climate. You have to apply nuance to the situation. If you are tuning in from the Intermountain West, basically Montana to Mexico in this like Utah, Colorado region, you should be raking your leaves into garden beds, or leave them if you're okay with whatever is underneath just turning into soil eventually. But if you have a front lawn that you're trying to keep alive for whatever reason, we can talk about maybe why you shouldn't keep it alive later. But if you are not trying to kill your lawn and you leave the leaves in the Intermountain West, you're going to lose your grass because those leaves are not going anywhere over the winter.
And if you've ever slipped on a sidewalk that's covered in slimy leaves, you don't want to leave
That's
that
what
for
I'm
somebody.
saying.
Yep.
And I'm just reading some crazy stuff about how when people are leaving the leaves or letting them clog the storm drains, you're actually creating infrastructure issues. And we're seeing contamination of the water supply from high nitrogen and phosphorus levels from the leaves.
Bacteria from the rotting leaves and everything. Yeah, they could be terrible.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this live. Here's my rant about USDA growing zones, which is that they are agricultural, U.S. Department of Agriculture. So a lot of folks will be like, does this grass work for zone 7? Does this grass work for zone 6? If it's a native plant, it works for you. It does. Now, there are still native annuals and native perennials, and there's high elevations in the same state and low elevations in the same state. But I'm really not concerned when I'm designing a landscape about the hardiness zone and if a plant is hardy down to zone X, Y, or Z, because native plants just don't. You don't have to consider that. Is it native to you? Great.
We get this all the time for Utah, where we're at. We're in northern Utah, and we're actually go from the Wasatch Mountain front. The western part of the valley we live in is almost arid desert, and the eastern part of the valley we live in is almost alpine. We can't give the same advice to somebody on the east side of the valley that we would to the west.
And I know that you've been around long enough. So pop quiz for Lee. What do we pay attention to if we're not paying attention to growing zones?
We pay attention to our microclimates, and we pay attention to...
What's the word? It's microclimates, right? But it's
ecoregion.
Ecoregion. Yeah. See, you A+.
I get a bronze star for coming in so poorly on that one.
So if you were to actually, if you wanted a map, if you were the type of person who really benefits from finding where you live and looking at a map, and that's why hardiness zones are appealing to people, you could also just look up your ecoregion. The USDA has those on a map as well. We are in the northwestern forested mountain ecoregion, but we are literally, there's a border running straight through Utah, because northwestern forested mountain, we're looking up towards Park City, Heber, Midway, Camas, all of that. And then as we turn towards Tooele, we're in the semi-arid desert
you
climate.
Can tell just from the mountain range that makes this valley. The Ochre Mountains on the west, completely different trees growing there, as opposed to the Wasatch Front and the Ochre Mountains. It's almost Northern European in climate.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. Yeah. And then we head towards Mediterranean as we're heading out of the Great Basin towards California. If we're confusing you, don't worry about it.
I was just reading about Spokane, Washington, another great Mediterranean climate.
But find out what ecoregion you are and pay more attention to that while you're planning your landscape. If you plan to use non-native plants, then hardiness zones. And if you do plan to use native plants, then just pick native plants. This is from Kelsey. What are good resources for finding out what our native plants are?
Oh, well, Kelsey's in Alberta, planning student looking for a project in the Yukon. I want to part of that project.
Is that the zones 1 through 3? I am imagining.
Yeah.
For Canada, we don't have, I don't know Canada's
We haven't done
resources.
much in Canada, have we?
Well, no,
you've done one thing in Canada.
In Toronto, and I just looked up native plants for that area, but I was going to suggest looking at United States-based resources like Lady Bird Johnson's Native Plant Database or Finding Your Native Plant Society, but I don't know them off the top of my head for Canada.
We'll be moving on to Canada eventually. I know that we're starting to pick up a few clients in there. We had a question about bindweed. Their whole yard is infested with bindweed and they have a slope that needs terracing. What would be the best thing to tackle first in your opinion?
I hate to always answer every question with "it depends." I really do. Let's answer your questions about bindweed, my least favorite weed in the entire world. It is a really hard plant to eradicate. What I find is generally best if you have a widespread bindweed infestation, I find that it is generally best to excavate in order to remove as much of the problem as possible before we then do supplementary management techniques. I wish I could say that there was one simple, clean solution that would eradicate bindweed entirely, and that's not the case. So let's say we scrape a bunch of the contaminated soil, we send that away because those rhizomes shouldn't touch soil again. They are going to sprout more invasive plants wherever they touch, so don't try to compost it or anything. Get rid of that. And then from there, we're going to need to heavily sheet mulch before we plant out our new landscape because we're trying to block out as much light as possible for the existing bindweed rhizomes that are then going to try to resprout. So heavily sheet mulch, plant out your new landscape. I wish I could say that was it still. You're going to get some sporadic bindweed into your new plantings. Then we're going to do a case-by-case chemical management of bindweed in a way that is not just spraying chemicals all over, which is bad ecologically. There's a great resource on KSL Greenhouse's Instagram page right now that has photos of this tutorial. But essentially, once we're dealing with just one bindweed, two bindweed, three bindweed, and not a field of it, once we're dealing with individual plants, then you can basically put the leaves of that plant gently into a plastic bag and then spray the herbicide into the plastic bag so that it's not getting everywhere and touching the rest of your soil.
Blew my mind when you said that last time.
Then you just leave the plastic bag there for 2 or 3 days. I like to just chuck a piece of cardboard or something on top of it. If you did it now, you probably wouldn't have to, but if you did it in summer, it's like a little greenhouse in there and you actually don't want the herbicide to get that hot because then it isn't as effective. So you'd shade it out so it doesn't. And you'd leave it there for 2 or 3 days and then you can just remove the bindweed and it's going to be okay.
Would excavating help them solve the bindweed problem?
At the beginning, yes, but there's going to be rhizomes in the soil even after you've scraped and the bindweed will come back, but it would remove a good amount of just the active issue so that you can at least have a second to plant out your new landscape first.
Gotcha. We had a second part of that question about bindweed. Terracing is something that they're going to be tackling. And would you say that's something they should probably put off until spring?
Don't rip up a bunch of soil and just have bare, exposed, disturbed dirt all winter long. If you're terracing, that means you have a slope. And so if we don't have anything planted on the slope and then winter happens, you're just going to have erosion city. So let's not do that. In the spring, do those steps we talked about, treat the bindweed. And then terracing, that's just grading and retaining, which is a budget and preference. If it's not a super steep slope, you can get away without a bunch of retaining. If it's a super steep slope, you might need to retain.
Do you have any recommendations for places to get edible native trees or shrubs in Utah? That's what's watching us.
Sure do. Generally speaking, Valley Nursery in Uinta, which is somewhere between Layton and Ogden, but like more on the mountainy side, on the east side, best source of native trees I've ever seen in Salt Lake as far as price. They've got some edibles. Native edibles would be things like a serviceberry tree. Bushes, they have golden currant, which is one of my favorite native shrubs. Maybe some gooseberries, maybe some huckleberries.
Lots of Oregon grape.
Definitely Oregon grape, although that's more of a jam and jelly kind of thing. That's not a eat off the bush kind of plant. But Valley Nursery, I source almost all of my trees from there because it's like $200 cheaper a tree than everywhere else.
My wife and I went there in early July to pick up a flower. We left
just
with
the odd flower errand.
We left with a car full of flowers and shrubs, and none of them died. And that is the first time I've ever experienced that from anything from a nursery. Usually something.
That's very good praise for Valley Nursery. One of my favorite places.
They're really good, really nice people too. And sometimes they throw little discounts in and they laugh at you when you're looking at them and going, but I thought I spent $400, not $3. Sometimes it's the other way around. You go to a nursery, you think you spent $300 and you spent $5. On leaves, if they get to your calf height or knee deep, what should you do?
If you have a leaf pile that if you have that many trees where you've got calf height or knee deep leaves that we need to deal with, you have grass under there that you need to keep alive. We have to move the leaves. It sounds like you got big mature trees. If you're cool with just converting all of that into like a native forest ecosystem, we could do some shade tolerant plants under there instead of a lawn. You could let the leaves do their thing and kill smother whatever's underneath. And then we'd be maybe regrading, smoothing things out, adding some mulch and planting out a gorgeous shade tolerant woodland landscape under there maybe. But that's the thing. That level of leaves, especially if you live in a place where leaves are slow to decompose, is going to sheet mulch essentially whatever was there first.
Yeah.
So if you need that ground to stay clear, you got to rake it somewhere. I rake them into just my regular landscaping beds, side yard, back corner, compost bins, leaf towers, vegetable beds, like just whole leaves. You don't even have to mulch them or anything. Make a great veggie garden bed mulch. You could just pile in inches and inches of that. It's going to protect the soil over the winter. And then in the spring, when you have your little tomato start, just push the leaves aside, plant the tomato straight into the soil, keep the leaves on as a mulch. It's perfect.
The wild pack of hippies I was raised by, they swore by just digging holes and burying their leaves in them.
Yeah, but the wild pack of hippies that you were raised by, I believe, were in the Pacific Northwest.
No, this is here in Utah.
That was here?
Yeah.
Hmm.
West side where the soil was terrible. And within
Your mom's
7 to 8
onto
years.
something there.
Yeah.
Because she's just putting
She's
a bunch of
adding
organic
biomass.
matter
Yeah.
into the soil.
And that soil went from terrible hard scrabble to black rich soil within 10 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
If it don't look like chocolate cake, I don't want it.
It looked like chocolate cake. It smelled like something else altogether. So.
Awesome.
Science saves. I have a strange question today. I potted a 4-foot Cara orange tree and did 4 notch cuts. On top of it, it's going to be 50 degrees tonight. Am I going to stress my tree?
50 degrees? Probably not. I'm not a non-native tree expert. I'm not a fruit tree, especially a citrus tree expert, because we don't live.
They don't do well here.
Yeah, that would need to be in a pot inside or in a greenhouse of some kind here. 50 degrees, I would assume not. When you're getting into the low 40s with citrus, definitely. A lot of citrus can be frost tolerant even. I'm kind of making stuff up a little bit though, because I've never even looked at a Cara orange tree in my life. I don't even know if that's the frost tolerant kind, but I know a lot of oranges can be frost
We may
tolerant.
have to get back to you on that one.
Sorry, my dude.
So 4 top-notch cuts, too much, do you
No,
think?
I don't think so. I think you're probably fine. Like I said, I'm not an arborist or a citrus tree expert.
What's the
so
notch cut?
I don't want to get into it.
Okay, we won't get into it. We're not arborists.
Yeah.
So whenever tax season comes by, we're not tax experts either. Sometimes we'll get some questions like, what would be the best way to get a good tax rebate with my landscape?
Conservation easement or something.
Yeah, there are ways that you can save money too, though, is through water savers programs. We do have a couple of videos up on our YouTube channel about that. If you're looking at ways that you could have your local government help you put in a new landscape for perhaps a park strip or water-wise grass, we'll be doing a whole series on that. We already started it. We're going to be finishing that up in the spring because everything went into hibernation on us.
Yeah.
So we can only shoot so much.
But also it's just going to be nice in the spring once things start filling in to be able to add the footage of what it's actually going to look like. Because otherwise I'm just using a lot of words trying to tell you to trust me.
Oh, we got a great question from Marcia. I want to take a stab at it, Daryl.
Lee's answering questions.
All right.
Wait, no. Shh. Lee.
Yeah.
Marcia Devon asks, what exactly do you mean by sheet mulching with leaves?
All right, Marcia, that is a fantastic question. And I'm so glad that I'm here to help you with this because Daryl's actually answered this 100 times. Not so much with leaves, but sheet mulching. With sheet mulch, you take cardboard or you take a carpenter's paper and you lay it down and you cover it with a bunch of stuff. And you basically end up over time suffocating out and blocking sunlight and air from heating these weeds. So they'll just die, right? So if you're using leaves, you're basically doing the same thing. The leaves are acting in the same capacity as the cardboard in that they're smothering and suffocating and blocking light from getting to that lower easement of weeds.
Or grass or whatever you want to smother.
Now, bindweed is a righteous bastard, though. It's going to survive.
But then you can start individually treating the bindweed that
Right.
makes its way up. Because at the end of the day, bindweed does need to photosynthesize in order to stay alive. So if we block out as much of the light as possible, then we're helping weaken the whole bindweed system under there. That was very good, Lee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate being able to answer that. We just put this in application in our own yard. One of the neat things about working for a landscape design company is that you pick up a lot of things out of osmosis. Even as a meager editor, you learn these things. And we had made the mistake of doing landscape fabric in our front yard with a thin layer of mulch.
Not the best.
We pulled all that out and put about 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top of that. And it's looking great. And I know that any weeds that pop through that are going to be so anemic in the spring and summer that it's just going to be easy street for us.
Marcia had asked us about the sheet mulching,
Yes.
but she was not the first person that asked about the bindweed.
Oh, yeah.
So Marcia, don't worry about the bindweed.
No.
What we're saying for the sheet mulching there is if you're leaving that many leaves, if you're saying it's knee deep or calf height deep, whatever's under there's gone. We're not going to have a lawn left under there unless you live in a place where, like in Florida, you literally in the time that I've taken to explain this answer, the leaves have since decomposed.
Yeah.
But if you live somewhere where things are going to break down at a more normal rate, we're just blocking out the light and now we have dirt wherever that is. So all I'm saying is, if you're not trying to keep a lawn alive under there, just embrace it, let the leaves decompose. And then next spring, we could just plant out shady native plants, some sedges,
Stuff that likes being under those
some
trees.
ferns if you live in a place with acidic soil. Because I'm guessing if you have that many leaves, you got a lot of trees, and then I'm guessing you got a lot of shade, and then I'm guessing you don't have a lot of light, so we need to plant woodland foresty vibes.
So she's asking if it's okay to leave the wet, sloppy ones if it's just in your yard on your.
Just as long as you're not walking. If it's on your driveway, please move it.
Yeah, you don't want to slip.
Clear a path for yourself if there's a highly foot trafficked area that you need to get to. When I just say don't necessarily leave the leaves everywhere, it's like, do you care about what's underneath? Because you might smother that out if you have too many leaves there.
One of my favorite things that we saw last year was when we were in North Carolina and we were talking to a woman who was literally composting wool rugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, are you serious? Like, I could leave a wool rug outside in Utah for years and it would just be a rug that's like gets progressively dirtier
Faded
over
and
4
dirty.
years.
Yeah.
This woman was just taking her version of sheet mulching, Marsha, in North Carolina, was taking a whole wool rug and putting it out and then just letting the earth grow up through it.
And it was.
Nature finds
It
a
was
way.
wild. It was so wild. Now we're getting into November. We're definitely seeing those cooler overnight temperatures. We've been seeing 35s here in northern Utah. Is there anything we need to prune back this time of year? Is there anything that we need to mulch in to keep it warm during the winter? Is that something we should be concerned about? Or
That's a great question. Again, I'm like, it depends on your situation. There are some pretty ubiquitous things you need to do if you live in a cold climate and winter is coming to prepare your yard and your landscape for winter. Mulching is great, especially if you have young trees or things with sensitive root systems, but a lot of native plants just go dormant over the winter. And if they're mature and established, we're not worried about that so much. The most obvious thing that I can think of is please winterize your sprinkler systems like immediately, because if you're a new homeowner like I was, 8 years ago, who didn't know that that was a thing. It was before I had joined this career field and I had just moved into my first home, and that was a really, really sad day when I learned that I should have winterized at least the night before. There are great resources for this. YouTube University will help you a lot. I don't need to go into the step-by-steps. Find your stop and waste, put the key in the ground, twist it, blow out the sprinkler system immediately. We don't need the water right now. We're fine for the rest of the year.
As I said to the company down the street from my house as I was walking by just a week ago, and they still have their sprinklers going. It's like, what are you watering right now?
We're so late in the season.
Yep.
Now, if you had a baby new plant and we're not getting rain every day, I could see wanting to establish it. So again, there's nuance. But winterize your sprinkler system. If you have trees, mulch them. Oh man, how nuanced do I want to get, y'all? If you have diseased trees, if you have trees like the sycamores right now that have anthracnose, you want to mulch the trees, but you want to get that infected debris, so all of those sycamore leaves, you want to get them cleared out and away from the trunk and the root system. Now, anthracnose is unlikely to affect other things. So like you could still take a sycamore leaf and put it in your side yard. You're not giving your side yard anthracnose. I don't know if it's sycamore exclusive, but it's affecting sycamores specifically and London plane trees. That fungal bacteria, whatever it is in there, if you just leave all those leaves sitting right up on the trunk and the root flare of your sycamore, then you're just making it more susceptible to those diseases through the winter and then into spring next year.
You're building a conduit for that to get around. Also, if you have a drip irrigation system, that's the easiest thing in the world to blow out. All you have to do is find the end or the terminal end of it. Usually it's just bent over and has a clip on it. I learned this the hard way myself because I did not install my drip irrigation system, but the owner of the house prior to us had said, hey, make sure you unclip the end of the system and just blast that out real quick so that your drip doesn't crack and disintegrate. Girl X, I have a patch of woods that they're developing a healthy understory in. All open areas being filled up with sassafras saplings. How can they get rid of that so they can create a more diverse understory?
That's fascinating.
I always just thought sassafras was a fancy old time cuss word.
It's a fancy old time root beer ingredient and it's made out of that thing.
Sarsaparilla. Okay, now I know.
Is sassafras invasive where you are? I don't know. It sounds like it is. You're going to want to get that cleared out in some capacity. So we could bring in the goats, we could bring in the weed whacker. It sounds like if we're getting a ton of saplings, it sounds like it's probably an interconnected root system like a tree of heaven is going to be. I think sassafras is native to the United States, right? North America and Eastern Asia.
It's aromatic. We're learning about a sassafras here. Well, on your time.
If we want to do a biodiverse native understory and the sassafras is completely competing out all of the other plants, you're either going to want to make some sort of ongoing management plan where you find a use for that sassafras. I could wax really romantic for a second, where we know that in forests where indigenous populations were managing saplings in order to harvest bark and flexible stems for basket weaving and so on, we know that those forests actually behave better and have more biodiverse ecosystems than when the trees are just allowed to grow with no human interaction and no management. Humans can play a valuable part in an ecosystem. We're not always just the bad thing that's affecting the ecosystem. And so if you have this sassafras that's getting so dense that you're not able to have anything else thrive there, you could find a use for that, even if it's just a mulch, right? Like harvesting it as free biomass to then wood chip in like a little electric wood chipper, then you could just have that as part of your management plan and keep that understory clear enough for other things to poke through. I would do that before I would go to the chemical method, like how we would be treating a tree of heaven, for example.
Yeah. And a lot of times we're paying for mistakes that were made in good faith once upon a time by forest services and arborists. The kudzu problem on the East Coast right now is because it wasn't the Audubon Society, but it was somebody along those lines about 100 years ago decided that kudzu was going to be amazing and that it was going to be the plant of the future. And so they planted it everywhere and they promoted it being planted everywhere. And now, lo and behold, it's invasive and horrible. Also turns out that's how we got the Russian olive here, was through
Russian olive.
well-meaning arborists trying to bring in a plant that would take over and do well in arid climates like ours. And now it's everywhere.
Do well. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong?
This plant will do so well. It can take over. What will go wrong?
It could take over the entire Jordan River Park.
Fangirl X says the saplings are wonderfully straight. Maybe I'll take up weaving. Yes, permaculture.
Yeah.
So permaculture value, turn a problem into a solution, right? So if the sassafras biomass that keeps taking over is the problem, it's not allowing other things in that understory to thrive, turn it into a solution. So if you don't want to necessarily weave a bunch of baskets, although that would be very cool if you wanted to learn that, look into wattle fencing. You can make woven fencing. It's very popular in the UK with willow and hazel branches. But if you still have some flexibility in the young saplings, then you could weave landscape edging, garden beds, cute little fences. You could also make trellises for your vegetable gardens, like little teepee trellises or woven things. Use it. It's free stuff. And then keep that ecosystem clear and let your native understory thrive while you're also benefiting. And you become an active part of your own ecosystem, which I think is pretty rad.
Yeah, wattle fencing is really neat. It's ancient. It's been around forever. And you can also plaster over it. There are people that have used wattle as a foundation. Yeah.
I did not know.
Yeah, wattle and daub. You can basically plaster over wattle and
building walls out of wattle.
Yeah. You can also, we know this because we just have a client that's actually building a straw bale house, which I almost quit my job so I could go build a straw bale house with them. But it turns out they don't want an old guy that only knows how to make videos.
I was in there having my consult talking about their straw bale house, and I saw him right here just like losing his mind because it's his dream.
There it is. And
Ta-da!
So, yeah, you can kind of see it there on the screen. I went with the most rustic one that I could find. You can go really tight with it too, but there's some really neat wattle fencing out there.
Look how cute that is like a garden fence.
Yeah.
It's so cute.
And if you're in like a heavily forested area where the deer are jumping over your fences to come and eat your garden, you can pick it up about 6-7 feet high. It's natural. And you could grow some grapes up it.
Free stuff, man. Yeah. All right. Rachel Peterson says, any tips on loosening really compacted clay soil? It's so compacted I can barely dig and cover crops won't germinate.
Is this the same person that has all the leaves?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I was going to say, you need to beat the person that's got knee-high leaves.
Yeah, we need organic matter in your soil.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of different ways we can do this. There's the fast ways and there's the more sustainable, slightly more ecological, but very slow ways to do it. So if we can't even get the cover crop to germinate, cover crop's a great way, but we need it to germinate. Fast ways would be either we're doing some sort of tilling and integrating of organic matter into your soil. I understand that no-till is the way to go. It's very big. We love no-till. The soil needs to be worth saving in order to feel precious about not tilling it. So I have no problem if you were to get some nice organic compost, organic matter like leaves, and then just till down to a couple inches so that you have some sort of soft medium for the cover crop to generate. And then if you do a cover crop, by the way, cover crops will often have invasive species in them like black mustard. So just double check that none of the ingredients in your cover crop seed is invasive while we're on that subject. But then you can seed it into a softer medium, and then the cover crop's going to form those really deep tap roots and break up your soil in a more long-term sustainable way. Because we know we need those roots to form those mycorrhizal fungal relationships and actually create a really beautiful soil structure. The tilling is a shortcut. It's a cheat code, but do the cheat code and then sow the seeds, and then we're on our no-till journey. Theoretically, you could get away with not tilling if we were to just bring in a bunch of compost and get like an inch or two of compost as a top dressing, because that'll still give you something soft for the seed to germinate in. But depending on how compacted your soil is, that might not be enough medium for those tender roots to break into the compacted soil. I'm going to say the third way, the slowest of all the ways, go steal Marsha's leaves from Marsha's lawn and get as much organic matter as you can down on this compacted soil. So leaves, wood chips, you could go on chipdrop.com and try to get free wood chips from an arborist. I think those are the two I'd recommend that are free or free-ish, leaves or wood chips, and get inches of them just mulched onto this compacted soil, and then wait a year. Then that soil is going to start breaking down. From there, you could then maybe just top dress with a little bit of compost so that you have some sort of medium for the seeds to germinate in. And then they're going to go through the little bit of compost, down through the leaves, and down into your slightly less compacted soil, and kind of mix everything together. I want to talk about bulbs.
Bulbs.
I want to talk about bulbs.
Okay.
There are some really cool things we could do right now, depending on where you live. But I mean, bulbs are great for everyone. There are all the bulbs that we know and love, right? We got tulips, we got daffodils, we got crocus. You are familiar with these bulbs. They're fine. They're good. They're not native, but they're pretty great. I will say, if you live in the Intermountain West, we live in an analog climate to the areas in Turkey and Kazakhstan where bulbs are native. And so we are truly the second best place on the planet to grow bulbs and have them perennialized. So even if they're not native, they're not invasive, they're not harmful. Honeybees still like them. Daffodils are still great at helping to deter pests. So I still plant bulbs even though they're not native. But don't worry, I'm going to tell you about the native bulbs right now. I will, so just hold on. That being said, if you don't live in the Intermountain West, bulbs will not perennialize as well. So you would probably be replanting your bulbs more often. Whereas I feel like sometimes in Utah, I get tulips that show up where I didn't even plant them because like a squirrel buried it or something. And I've had tulips for 10 years that I didn't even plant. So they've probably been there for 25 years because of how well adapted our climate is here in Utah for bulbs. I love bulbs. I don't know if you can tell based on this rant.
They're the best.
That being said, there are some native bulbs that I think are really underutilized and underappreciated. My favorite one, I've really never spoken this word out loud or heard it spoken out loud. So it's either Tritelia or Tritelia or Tritelia, Tritelia. That's how you spell it. And it's a beautiful native bulb with little gorgeous purple star-shaped flowers. Native basically where we are in the country, all the way west. And then also Calochortus bulbs and Tritelia bulbs are native, fall planted. You can actually get away with planting them in spring as well. Gorgeous, beautiful bulbs.
Okay, Marsha has a question about a 100-year-old oak tree. If they have one on their property that's in decline, is it possible to turn that around?
I mean, oak trees can live a lot longer than 100 years.
Yeah.
100-year oak is that's the colloquial phrase you hear. That's a 100-year oak.
It's a century oak.
If it's diseased, you want to make sure that those leaves, which do not decompose quickly, are far away from the trunk and the root flare, just like what I was talking about with sycamores and London planes and anthracnose, because fungal diseases and bacteria from those leaves can just get right back into the tree where it's most vulnerable there. So you'll want to keep that nice and clear. Typically, it's keeping it debris free and then lots and lots of water, especially during drought periods. Without knowing any details about your tree, those are the two most ubiquitous answers. At the end of the day, you need to get a certified arborist who is tree health focused and ask for their certification and ask if they are focused on preserving trees or removing trees. Because you don't want an arborist to just show up and say, yeah, I can take that down. That'll be $2,500. Thank you. You want someone who's really going to try to save the tree.
Yeah, if the guy pulls up and he looks like Grizzly Adams, chances are he's going to try to save the tree.
Stereotypical of guys who look like Grizzly Adams, but I understand.
Yeah, this is every arborist I've ever known with a long beard and long hair usually wants to save the tree.
Yeah.
Any tips for germinating yarrow?
For a lawn replacement? Yes, straight on the ground. Of course, it depends on where you are. If you were here where yarrow is super native, anywhere basically west of the Mississippi, I imagine. I mean, it's kind of everywhere, if I'm being honest,
it is.
In the United States. I do not worry about pre-germinating it as a lawn replacement. You want to use the seed. And I would personally just get an eco lawn blend that has like a clover fescue yarrow mix.
It's also going to spread on its own.
And here's the tips, everybody. Do you want my tips for overseeding an existing lawn with a more drought tolerant lawn variety? You're going to take a hard rake, or if you're really fancy, a dethatcher, but you don't have to go buy something special. Just a hard rake will work. And in the spring, you're going to just go absolutely nuts on your lawn with that hard rake. Just take out every negative feeling you've ever had on the lawn. We want to disturb it and get places where you can get seed to soil contact, and also dethatch any of that like dried, matted lawn stuff that's going to prevent seeds from permeating. So go nuts with that. If you have a really compacted, lumpy, bumpy lawn, you'll probably want to aerate at that time as well. And then you're going to take a little compost, a little topsoil, a little bit of sand. You're going to mix it together. And any places that you got little lumps, little bumps, little divots, you're unhappy, you're going to spread that out and take a lawn leveling rake and smooth it out. So now we have a nice even surface to work with. And then you overseed with an eco lawn blend. Fescue, clover, yarrow, probably 50% of the water needs of a traditional bluegrass, but still looks like emerald green and glorious. And you can do that without having to rip your whole lawn out, because there's still like cool season grasses and they'll just grow in with the bluegrass and be biodiverse.
Is there a fertilizer we need to lay down too? Or is that
the compost that you've added in
that's going to do the job?
Yeah, I'm not trying, especially for a yarrow. This is a native plant.
Yeah.
That thing can grow out of a rock on the side of a freeway.
I've seen it.
You don't need fertilizer. Terry Reed says, I used straw as mulch in my raised garden beds. Should I remove it and then add dry leaves to the tops of the beds and just put them on top of the straw? No, don't worry about it. Straw is carbon, leaves are carbon. It's the same. It's just a different straw's dried grass. This is leaves.
Yeah.
So if you've got straw and you still want to keep adding and you have room in your bed to build, just chuck the leaves straight on top of that. You'll just have a thicker mulch layer.
Now, we had a great question come up at the beginning of the year. Somebody's asking about using logs or hugelkultur as a form of carbon. And that's one of those great things where, of course, a guy got really righteously indignant about it because hugelkultur works great in his incredibly wet climate.
In Appalachia?
Yeah. Well, we're not there.
In the Pacific
We're the
Northwest?
second driest state in the country. So hugelkultur doesn't work great in Utah.
There's hugelkultur that's like the actual by the book way that this, I'm assuming, very German person.
Swedish, Germanic, Northern Finland.
Yes. I'm assuming that like if you do it exactly like that and you give it time, several years actually, for the nitrogen levels in your soil to catch up, that's fine. What I'm sick of are influencer people just being like, shove 87 logs in your vegetable bed and call it hugelkultur, right?
Yeah.
So for that's not going to work. But it's different when we're talking about carbon that is being used as soil, because they're talking in this pseudo hugelkultur way. They're talking about saving money and cheaping out on putting in soil by just filling in a bunch of logs instead. Yeah. There's a very big difference between doing that and then just having soil and using carbon as a mulch on top. Right. The plants aren't actually growing out of that carbon. That carbon will slowly break down and turn into soil. The roots are down here and the mulch is up here, you know? So very, very big distinction.
Do established conifer trees grow up 7 feet deep tree wells for 60 plus trees? Arborist says don't dig out tree wells.
So you've got like the root flare and then it's low and then it gets high again. Yeah, you don't want to dig out tree wells. You just kind of want to let that do what it's doing. If it looks ugly and you do not like how it looks, I'd recommend maybe getting a pine straw mulch and just laying that down on top so you have a nice sort of finished looking blanket kind of thing. The name is not clear. Pine straw mulch is a mulch that's made out of woven pine straw. Kind of looks like a Rumpelstiltskin kind of like woven thing. And you can buy them in rolls and you just roll them out, tack them down with some landscaping staples. When all else fails and you can't grow anything in that weird tree well, you could still get a nice blanket of pine needles on it. And then as the pine needles fall from the tree, they'll blend in. I've done that with like a creeping Oregon grape and a couple focal boulders, and you end up with a really pretty kind of woodland look under there. Hoping you mean like not just immediately like you're going to fall in it and die, but like a gradual.
That's a tree moat.
But if it truly is just do whatever the arborist says, that's a unique case.
Marsh wants to know if pine shavings and from a chicken coop are good for mulch.
Oh, that's interesting. Pine shavings. So we're talking about not needles. We're talking about I'm fine with it. People are very weird about pine trees, pine needles, pine mulch. They're saying that it's going to acidify the soil. It would take so much of that biomass to actually move the needle on a pH reading, especially in a place where, I know, Marcia, you don't live where we are, but where we live, the soil is so alkaline. Don't worry about it. Put as much pine anywhere as you want. If you're talking about pine needles, or pine shavings that you've used already in a chicken coop, and now it's mixed with the nitrogen from the manure, what I might say is, instead of just putting that straight onto a bed as mulch, because it's probably just not going to look or smell as good as we want it to, get that composting. And if you have a chicken coop, like, you could do a walk-in chicken run with the compost beds in the chicken run, let the chickens turn and scratch out the compost for you, and then you'll just have amazing garden soil from that. That's one of my favorite reasons for people having chickens. Obviously, the fresh eggs and stuff are great, but the fact that you have the carbon-based shavings for the coop and then the manure, it becomes just like a 1-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, and you can just compost that without having to add a bunch of extra stuff in. So I just give it the couple extra months in the compost bin before you start spreading it around.
Yeah, I know when I was a teenager, my parents had the chicken coops with the pine shavings in them. We also had rabbits, so they used rabbit droppings, and then we used water from the duck pond to water the garden. And
it's kind of smart.
Yeah.
Especially if there's fish in there, because then you're getting, it's kind of smart.
At some point, people filled in around the trees with metal collars that are 7 feet deep. You ever heard of that?
Jackie, this is a unique situation.
Wow.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
You want to level out and do hard scraping. Arborist says roots could have grown up, so don't dig. Yeah. Your arborist is absolutely right, because the trees are doing what they need to do, and then the roots are going up. Leave that area alone. Do what you need to mask, conceal, add a mulch on top. I would not mess with it, especially if a certified arborist is already giving you those instructions.
Yeah.
Because I did not go to certified arborist school.
No, they're the specialists. It goes back to like what Marcia was saying about that oak tree. If you've got an arborist that says you can say it, that tree survived the Great Depression and Calvin Coolidge's administration.
I can't with you. We're so chaotic today.
That tree survived Vietnam, Korea, and World War II.
Listen to your arborists, everybody. Listen to your arborists. All right. Yay, one of my favorite questions.
Oh.
Rachel, thank you for your amazing, insightful questions. Please keep them coming. What are some good native shade and understory plants for Utah? All right, I'm going to talk about Utah, but I'm going to widen it so that anybody watching from a different ecoregion, different area of the country can also apply some nuance to their own yard. You want to focus on your woodland ecosystems. So when you're trying to identify what native plants are going to survive in part to full shade in your area, look to the woods, look to your native forests that are around you. Right? So those native understory shrubs that are growing in your pine forests, your general conifer forests, or like in an aspen grove, that's what's going to do well here. For us, understory shrubs would be things like Oregon grape, huge in the woods, elderberry, black elderberry, blue elderberry. You can do native cultivars of elderberry if you want those like really deep burgundy tones, but they're not host plants the way that a true native would be for wildlife. Native edibles, currant can take some shade, gooseberry can take some shade. I'd say for shrubs, that's what, dogwoods, duh. Red twig dogwood, my favorite thing in the whole world because of the fire engine red bark. That's an understory shrub that's used to growing under a canopy of native trees. So no matter where you live, if you're trying to plant for full shade, just figure out what plants are native to the forests in your region.
And we are going to have a plant resource list on our website, yardfarmer.co. It'll be on the resources page. That's going live anytime now.
Well, until when I take a second to edit the page.
Oh, I was going to blame the website hamsters.
No, it's me.
Yeah.
I'm always the problem.
And Marcia has confirmed that tree was there for Calvin Coolidge.
Marcia and Rachel are good time tonight. Yeah, we like you guys.
Yeah, please make sure to subscribe to this channel. When we come back in the spring, we're going to be laying down the ancient wisdom when it comes to permaculture. And the coolest thing about you've been doing this for about 2 years. I've been with you for 2? Well,
only 2?
You
Never
came
mind.
in,
sorry to interrupt you.
You came in hard about 2 years ago. You were doing it before that, but like full-time design. We're going on about 2 years. And I've noticed that as you take on clients from different parts of the country, the ancient wisdom from other regions is starting to come in too. So we're trying to make sure that we have resources available for folks no matter where you live. So for now, those resources will actually be the East Coast, the Midwest, or Rocky Mountain region, and the West Coast.
The West Coast.
So
Yeah, we haven't taken the time to go into all the individual ecoregions because that would expand from 4 groups to like 11 or 12 groups at the lowest category level.
And we could write a small book just on Florida.
Literally.
Yeah.
Truly. So instead, we just went east, middle, mountain, and west. So we're going to have 4 categories on our websites, and then we have lists of native plants. It's not there yet, so please just be patient with me. I literally am the bottleneck here where I have to sit down and read everything.
And she only does 10 hours of consults a day. Just 10 hours. No big deal.
Sometimes you're not even exaggerating that much.
I'm not. I'm married to the person who manages your schedule.
That's
It's
true.
Crazy.
Do y'all know Lee? Do y'all know who Lee
I'm
is?
Lee.
So this is Lee. He's our like content director, if you will. And he's married to Rachel, who is truly the glue that holds all of this together, who I owe my life and my sanity to.
Me too. Weird that.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, the Cade fam is basically saving my life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I love that Marsha and Rachel here become BFFs. So
yes,
we like bringing people together.
Bringing friends together.
Well, should we wrap it up, boss?
I think this was fun. Thanks for living with us, dealing with us. Today was especially chaotic.
Yeah, and now I'm looking at just from the webcams on our laptops, and it doesn't look terrible.
Yeah, we might do this next time. Well, this is a new laptop.
Oh yeah, that explains it. it. So if you do have questions, save them for the spring. Also, you can check us out at yardfarmer.co. That's not .com, .co. And of course, we are a full-time design firm. So we do actually have landscape architects and other folks that can help you realize the landscape of your dream. We don't do so much gardening, but we can help with it for sure. And this person's brain is amazing. Like she heard a thing once 7 years ago and can pull up not only the nuance of that conversation, but who she was talking to and what the weather was like. It's
very
wild.
nice of you to say.
No, I think your brain is
a deeply troubled person because of it, but it's fine.
But when it comes to permaculture, it's fantastic. So thank you so much, folks, for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel. We'll actually be carving up little segments of this and releasing them later because sometimes people don't have an hour to sift through a video. We want to make sure that we get some of these little nuggets of information out there for you folks. And thanks again so much for joining us. Say goodbye, Daryl.
Bye, everybody. This was fun and weirdly chaotic this time, but I had a great time.
I had a great time too. Thank you
All
so
right.
much. Take
Talk
care.
to you
everyone.
later. Bye.